What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about the case of Sydney Powell. This is the story of a 19-year-old college student who failed out of her university, and rather than tell her parents, she decided she was going to resort to murder. So this is 19-year-old Sydney Powell, and she was a really smart girl. She was in honor roll all throughout high school and finished at the top of her class. Sydney was actually so smart that when she graduated, she received a presidential scholarship to whatever university she wanted to go to. Sydney chose the University of Mount Union, and after graduating in 2018, she attended that college. Sydney's parents were beyond excited for her, as that was their prized child. Sydney and her mother were especially close, and they spent so much time together, told each other everything. When it was time for Sydney to leave, her parents helped her pack, moved her into her dorm, and said their goodbyes. Much like any teenager going to college for the first time, Sydney was having a lot of new experiences. Sydney made friends, went to parties, just the whole college freshman experience, and she loved it. But she may have loved it a little bit too much. Her first semester in college was a little rough, and the second semester was even worse. After only a year of being in college, Sydney was placed on academic probation because her performance was just terrible. I was a college student too, once upon a time, and I had tons of fun in college, I'm not gonna lie. But I knew when it was time to take care of business. Sydney, on the other hand, I think probably just got a little bit too carried away with the college lifestyle. So after another semester of failing her classes, Sydney was officially removed as a student from her university. Sydney's constant partying and socialization, ignoring her classes, finally caught up to her. By the time the spring 2020 semester came around, Sydney was no longer a student at her university. And even despite her close relationship with her mother, Sydney decided to keep this a secret. This already is kind of crazy to me because I can't even imagine the guilt that would be weighing on my shoulders if I failed out of college and just didn't tell anybody. I feel like that would just eat me up inside. So Sydney returned home for Christmas break, and the entire time she was with her family, she didn't tell them anything. Everyone just assumed that the prized child academic weapon of a woman that Sydney was doing good in college and passing all of her classes. The reality could not be any further from what they thought. So by the time the spring 2020 semester rolls around and the first day of classes arrive, Sydney leaves her home and returns back to the university, even though she's not enrolled in any of the classes. At this point, her parents still have no idea that she's living a lie. Throughout the first weeks of the semester, Sydney did her best to keep her lie from crumbling. But eventually, as time passed and that guilt continued to weigh on Sydney's shoulders, the cracks in her story started to show. Sydney's friends were noticing odd behavior from her. She was caught sneaking into classes, asking other people to let her into buildings, and was even removed from the campus dorms entirely. Even after all this, Sydney still did not tell her parents what was going on. Instead, Sydney began living in hotels that were close enough to the university to keep the impression that she was still a student there. One day, Sydney's father actually called the university to make a tuition payment on her behalf, and he learned the truth of everything. The university told her parents that not only was she not a student there anymore, but they actually completely revoked her entire scholarship. Now, I'm trying to put myself in her parents' shoes. If I'm a parent and I find out that my child has been living a lie and pretending to be in college that I've been paying for, I'd be furious. So when her parents learned this information, they decided they were going to confront Sydney when she came home for spring break. The day Sydney was coming home from college, she actually walked in on her mother, who was in the middle of a phone call with the dean of the university. Sydney became so mad, she literally attacked her mother while she was still on the phone with the dean. So the dean is just listening over the phone. He can hear screaming, he can hear arguing, he can hear loud noises and banging over the phone. And eventually Sydney took the phone and just hung it up completely. It turns out that Sydney attacked her mother with an iron skillet and a knife. This attack was so brutal that her mother didn't survive. After the attack, Sydney broke a window and tried to stage the scene that someone broke in and attacked them and killed her mother and then ran away, but it was pretty obvious what actually happened. So when the police arrive, Sydney's telling them this made-up story, and after a little tiny bit of investigation, the police kind of put together the truth of what happened. Sydney herself was covered in blood, cuts, scratches, marks. Like, she could not have done a worse job of trying to cover up her crime. So Sydney was immediately arrested and shortly after had a psychiatric evaluation done on her. By the time Sydney's trial came around, her defense revealed that she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Not only that, but Sydney's family themselves were begging the jury to show mercy on her. Regardless of the family's wishes and the diagnosis, the jury actually found Sydney guilty for the murder of her mother. Sydney was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after only 15 years. In 2038, Sydney can apply for parole, where she will then be 38 years old. Following the trial, Sydney's father maintained this image of his daughter just being the perfect girl who could do no wrong. He was literally quoted saying, "We understand that this was not Sydney," which is kind of crazy to me because she was literally found guilty of stabbing his wife to death. But I don't know. I'm not a father, so I can't put myself in his shoes. He was then quoted saying that this was a very little, small snippet in her life, which to me, I feel like murdering your mother should be like a big snippet in your life. I don't think you just brush that off. Thank you guys for watching today's episode. Please subscribe, like, and comment on the video if you found it to be interesting. Have a good rest of y'all's day, and I will see y'all on the next one.